So, welcome to another episode of The Marketer's Edge, a series designed to share senior level marketing perspective about marketer challenges, opportunities, and agency relationships. Our goal is to help marketers and agencies learn from other marketers across different industries. Today, we're talking with Dan Klopp, the Director of Marketing and Business Development for the Space Systems Division at ILC Dover. ILC Dover is based out of Delaware. Dan, thanks for joining us today. How have you been?
I'm doing fine. How are you doing, Mark?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much. Really appreciate you making the time today. I've got a small handful of questions for you, but before we jump into that, can you tell me a little bit about the Space Systems Division at ILC Dover, maybe about the company as a whole, and tell us what do you do for them as a director of marketing and business development. I'd like our audience to know what kind of company it is and what you do.
Okay. So the company's history goes all the way back to the mid 1930s. It
Okay.
started as International Latex Corporation. That's where
Oh,
the
nice.
ILC came from in our name.
Okay.
And was started in upstate New York. Somewhere along the way, the company moved to Dover, Delaware. I think that was in the mid 1940s. And it established a consumer products piece and a
Hmm.
government contracting piece. So
Okay.
we are a legacy. ILC Dover is a legacy of the government contract piece.
Got it.
And at that time, the corporation was still under one ownership and leadership, but it was split into International Playtex Corporation and International Latex Corporation.
Hmm.
So the consumer bit was the Playtex side. The government contracting bit was our side. The piece that I work in today is what we call our Space Systems Division. We're most well known, for those that do know us at all, for spacesuits. We've
Okay.
made every EVA spacesuit for NASA from Apollo through today. So that makes us the only company in the world that has footprints of boots that we designed on the surface of the moon.
That's so
Um,
awesome.
so we missed the first two U.S. space programs, so we didn't make the suits for the Mercury missions. We didn't make the suits for the Gemini missions, but we've done every suit since then. And we also do inflatable space habitats as part of the division, and we do spacecraft landing systems as part of this piece of the company. As a matter of fact, there was a running joke back in the Apollo era, back in the late 1960s, early 1970s, that the same company that made ladies' undergarments also made the spacesuits, which wasn't quite true because the company had actually already split at that point, but there was a grain of truth because we both have the same historical roots.
That's awesome. And as director of marketing and business development, what sort of things do you get involved in at ILC Dover in the Space Systems Division?
So I've only been on board for about 3 years now.
Okay.
The interesting thing about the space systems piece of ILC Dover is that for the longest time, we only had one customer. It was NASA. Spacesuits are actually covered under United States ITAR, International Traffic in Arms Regulations, so they're
Hmm.
considered part of national defense. There's all sorts of export restrictions, even though we're a private company. We're not allowed by law to sell to like the Russians or the Chinese or certain other governments.
Okay.
So we only had one customer. And in that era, when you only have one customer and they know who you are and you know who they are, you really don't need much marketing. However, about 3 years ago, the powers that be in the company saw that the space world, space exploration, was becoming more commercial.
Okay.
So they thought, well, we have zero marketing expertise in this company. We need to bring somebody that on board that has that
Nice.
understands the technology, but has some level of experience in the marketing world. So that's how I got here.
That's awesome. That's great. Um, I just read the article about ILC Dover's involvement in the production of the next generation spacesuit, and that unlike the spacesuit your company created during the Apollo era, you'll actually get to brand these suits with ILC Dover's name and logo. And just how cool is that? Can you tell me a little
Well,
bit about how this all transpired and how you determined the relative value of that placement for your company's brand?
so you have to look at NASA's funding model to understand why this change. NASA is moving from an era from the beginning of the space, beginning of NASA till just recently, where NASA funded all the R&D and owned all the resulting products. So they funded the research and development efforts. So although NASA themselves didn't do the work, they contracted to private industry. So in our case, they contracted to us to develop spacesuits. But NASA paid for our R&D and then owned the suits. So they owned all the intellectual property, and they got to dictate what was on the suits because they were the customer, they were the R&D funder, they owned the whole ball of wax, even though NASA engineers themselves didn't do the work. They were done by, in the case of spacesuits, by ILC Dover.
Right.
That's all changed now. NASA is moving to a leasing model from an ownership model. So if you look, the SpaceX Crew Dragon is the most visible piece of that. So back in prior to, or let me say, up to the end of the space shuttle era, NASA owned those. They didn't build any of those. They didn't design any of those things. It was companies like Lockheed Martin and Boeing that made those pieces, but NASA owned the rockets, they owned the spacecraft, they owned the spacesuits. So NASA got to dictate. What they're doing now is, and this is going to sound funny, but it's the way I euphemistically think of it, is SpaceX and soon to be Boeing, and then followed after that, a company called Sierra Space, will be the Uber and Lyft of the space community. And so NASA's astronauts are flying back and forth from the International Space Station on SpaceX rockets, but NASA doesn't own those rockets. SpaceX owns those rockets.
Right.
Well, that's with this next generation spacesuit contract. That's the way the contract is written. So when we bid on the contract, we knew what we were bidding on was a suit services contract. So we will retain ownership of the suits, and NASA will lease the suits on an as-needed basis. So we get to, now we're paying for the R&D, we're paying for the suit maintenance and all that sort of thing. But what it does for us is it allows us to not only lease the suits to NASA, but lease them to other commercial partners as needed for commercial needs in space.
Got it.
So it's good for the taxpayer because the taxpayer doesn't foot the entire burden now, unlike the previous business models. Some of it's being funded by private industry now, but NASA's just so anyway, long-winded way of saying that now because we retain ownership, we get to decide what goes on the suits.
Yeah, no, that's cool. So that thus the need for somebody to come in and run marketing and business development.
Right.
Yeah.
So we get to put our own logos on. We have even had discussions internally, although I have some challenges internally because the company hasn't historically embraced marketing. Right. So my challenges are kind of twofold. It's an internal getting folks to understand what marketing really is. Right. When you're talking, it was for the longest time, it was an engineering-driven company, which is great because we have some of the best engineers we have the best spacesuit engineers in the world, bar none. But engineers have a certain way of looking at the world, and marketers have a slightly different way of looking at the world. And so it's been an interesting challenge for me. One that I've faced at other times in my career, but so I feel I'm pretty well suited for that. But yeah, we had internal discussions around the possibility of helping defer some of our costs by selling logo space on the spacesuit. So, for instance, you could put a Nike swoosh. I mean, much like and one of the engineers said, "Well, geez, the astronauts are going to start looking like NASCAR stock car drivers, have logos all over the suit."
That'd be awesome.
and I said, "Calm down." I said, it's just a point of discussion. If if our funding model would allow for that, it's a way for us to defer some of our costs.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. I love it. I love it. Yeah. I mean, the possibilities are endless, certainly.
Right.
That's cool. What a great challenge for you and the organization, as you're sort of inventing, new ways of marketing this business. So I noticed that your education started in the world of science while at Millersville University, but then pivoted to marketing at Duke School of Business. and your career has involved marketing, the marketing of technology ever since. Can you talk a little bit about what you like about what you do and how your different experiences have benefited your career over the years?
So it's funny. My father is a mechanical engineer by education. Most of his career was spent as an automotive engineer specifically.
Okay.
So I grew up in a household of science and engineering. By the time I was 12 years old, I could tear an engine down to nuts and bolts and put it back
Wow.
together again.
Wow.
My father is also an aircraft enthusiast. He actually started his career as an aircraft engineer. Um, he's a private pilot. And so I was flying model airplanes. I was studying NACA airfoils and things like Reynolds numbers, and that's I know that's lost on most of your audience, but that's all the technology stuff uh, of figuring out how a wing is going to lift based on the shape of the airfoil and so forth.
Yeah. Yeah. Very
So
cool.
I was reading that kind of stuff on my own as a teenager. And so that's the kind of household I grew up in. So
Sure.
when I went off to college, I started out as a physics major, and then took a few chemistry classes along the way, and decided, oh, I like this stuff too. So, and I was going to a university, Millersville, at that time, that you paid one flat fee for per semester. You didn't pay by the credit hour, but you could fit as many credit hours as you wanted
Hmm.
into your schedule for one flat fee. So long story short, I started just adding up, loading up with various credits, just because I thought, well,
What the
between
heck?
myself and my
Yeah.
father, we're paying the bill, so
Yeah.
may as well take as much advantage of this. So I ended up being having enough chemistry credits to be a full blown chemistry major by the time I graduated, and I did all this in 4 years, by the way. The lightest semester I took was 21 credit hours.
Oh my
That was the
gosh.
lightest. Most semesters I was at 24 or 27 credit
Oh,
hours.
nice.
So I took college very seriously, unlike a lot of my classmates who were off partying a good bit of the time. And I ended up having to take so many math courses as prerequisites for chemistry and physics
Okay.
courses
Sure.
that by the time I came to the end, it's like, well, I need two more math courses to be a math major too. So I ended up as a triple major undergrad, and then went to work in industry. Started out as a lab technician, and then just through pure dumb luck circumstance, ended up being the lab manager and the QA manager for a plant, all within my first year in business.
Wow.
I
Okay.
found myself at 22 years old managing a team of 42 people, all of whom were older than me, all these
Wow.
QA technicians and lab technicians. And it was just pure circumstance. But anyway, through that experience, I decided, wow, there's maybe something to this business stuff, because I started getting involved as part of the leadership team in
Right.
the business decisions of the
At
business
age 22.
at age 22. And so I thought, well, I don't know anything about this business stuff. And my dad didn't know. I mean, I didn't grow up around that. I grew up around science and engineering. So I decided to take the bold move of quitting my job and going back and getting an MBA.
That's great.
And when I first went to my first semester at Duke, it was sort of an overview thing of all, you didn't start specializing until your second year.
Sure.
And it was an overview of all business disciplines. And so it was all new to me, and I was soaking it up like a sponge. But I have to tell you that a marketing professor that I had my very first semester at Duke, I forget the gentleman's name. I'm sorry that I don't remember it, but it was a life-changing experience, because he started the very first class by looking out at the class and asking the somewhat rhetorical question, can anybody here tell me the difference between a good strategic marketer and a mathematician? And of course, we all sat there with a glazed look on our face. And he said,
Right.
the difference is the marketers have to wear ties. And so at that point, I thought, well, I'm pretty good at math. Maybe I ought to do this. And
Right.
I have to
No,
tell you
that's.
that there is a lot of math involved in the type of marketing that I've done in my career.
Oh, I'm sure.
There was a point where I was running a market research team, and we were building a mathematical model of the market that we were competing in that would predict future market share based on current investments. And it did
Hmm.
that for ourselves and our five major competitors in that market area.
Interesting.
And I thought I was pretty good at math, but it got over my head really quickly, and I ended up having to hire a PhD statistician to be part of my team.
Oh,
to do
wow.
that.
That's fantastic.
But we
I
built a
think,
market model that was very successful in terms of implementing. We knew things about our competitors that they didn't know about themselves in
wow.
terms of market perceptions of them. And that helped. That was a division of Hewlett Packard at the
Okay.
time. And that drove that first market area that I was in. We drove the market share from about 16% worldwide when I joined that piece of Hewlett Packard to about 65% market share worldwide
Wow.
when I left. And it was
Wow.
all because we knew where to make the right investments based on this
Yeah.
model.
Is that background sort of in analytics and mathematics sort of carried with you throughout? I mean, all of your experiences have really been in the tech space. Has that been of benefit to have that sort of foundation?
Absolutely. I've spent a
Okay.
career, the way I term it, as I work at the confluence of the three laws of thermodynamics and the four P's of marketing.
Okay.
And 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 it's a pretty unusual skill set I think that I have.
Yeah. Yeah.
That I do understand the three laws of thermodynamics, and I understand thoroughly the four P's of marketing and how you can change elements in your marketing mix to affect your relative market position.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Very cool. So I read your LinkedIn profile that you are, and I quote, a strong proponent of the servant leader theory Y management philosophy. And I was wondering if you could tell our listeners what that is and how you apply it to your day-to-day management of your business.
The servant leader model, or some people call it Theory Y, that Theory Y, Theory X thing came out of a couple of MIT professors back in the 50s, I believe, MIT Business School professors and I'm going to give my really smart aleck version of this. So Theory X, to sum it up, is whip them harder and they'll work harder.
Okay.
And Theory Y is treat them with dignity and respect and point them in the right direction and turn them loose. So I'm a big proponent, mostly formed by my first career stop, which was at Hewlett Packard. So Bill
Okay.
Hewlett and Dave Packard were very unique gentlemen, especially for their era. They started the company in 1939 in Palo Alto, California, and many people don't believe that or don't understand or even know or aware that the phenomena that we call Silicon Valley today is a result of Hewlett Packard Company,
Hmm.
solely Hewlett Packard Company. They were all that was in that Palo Alto area, that central Bay area on
Sure.
the West Bay, was Orange Groves and Stanford University, and they were graduate students at Stanford University working on their master's in electrical engineering together, and their master's thesis they worked on together, and their professor said, "This is such a cool thing. You ought to, when you get out of school, you ought to commercialize this product."
Hmm.
And they made their very first sale to Disney Studios, Walt Disney himself, as a matter of fact.
Hmm.
So great part of the company lore. But they started Hewlett Packard and had this strong philosophy of hiring smart people and just pointing them in the right direction and turning them loose.
That's great.
And
Yeah. So
to this day, I have no idea how I got in because I don't think I'm as smart as a lot of the people that I worked with. But I was surrounded by just brilliant, brilliant people.
yeah.
We had a mantra when I was working there, and especially in later years when I was in management and senior management positions there, that we hire the best, we pay the best.
Hmm.
And it paid off. I mean, the company in the 18 years that I worked for them, we went from just under $2 billion in annual revenue worldwide to $62 billion in revenue
Amazing.
worldwide. And all of that was without a single acquisition. That was all
That
organic growth.
that is incredible. That's
Yeah.
wild.
So,
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about theory X and theory Y, and I think particularly in today's world of, I know we're not completely post-COVID, but post-COVID and so many employees being able to they're managing their world a different way, and leaders of organizations have had to adjust to that. And I think that, I think particularly today Theory X approach to management would fall flat big time, just because of the world we live in today. So yeah,
Although it's
very
surprising, in my career, I've seen quite a few companies that are still adhering more to the Theory X side of
really,
sort of command and control, and you even see it in news stories today about companies resisting having their, now that we're in almost a post-COVID world,
hmm
resisting having their employees come back to the office full
that's
time.
that's
And that
right.
there's an element of that that's, well, I need to, if I don't see those employees and see what
Yep.
they're doing every day, they're all fooling around. And that's
Yeah.
really the basis of that Theory X, Theory Y
Right.
management is, do you really believe that people want to do a good job inherently
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
therefore will do it on their own?
Right.
Or do you believe that they're inherently lazy and therefore need somebody looking over their shoulder to ensure that they do their work?
Yeah. 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 Our good friend Elon Musk, right?
Right.
He was, yeah, he certainly is apparently a proponent of Theory X. So,
Well, and I've talked to
um,
quite a few people that have been burned out in the SpaceX piece of Elon's
yeah.
empire, and
Yeah.
burned out is the right word.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's an
Yeah. It's
interesting organization.
definitely, definitely. So I'm curious, what are some of the toughest challenges you've faced marketing products in the technology space? You know, you've been in it a long time, and how have you historically overcome those challenges?
So I would say my biggest challenges throughout looking at the entirety of my career have been internal in the company because for some
Okay.
reason I always seem to land in these companies that have historically been engineering driven. And
Okay.
that's become sort of my forte is I've been surrounded by a group of engineers. I've been usually on the leading edge of marketing people. Actually, back when I joined Hewlett Packard, I was part of a group of people that were hired out of business school that were the reaction from most of the engineers that when I came in is, well, what are you doing here? You're a marketing guy. We don't need marketing. We just got to make the best products.
Right.
And so my challenges have been getting engineers and engineering managers and senior management to a certain extent to understand the value of marketing and the value of understanding what your not only what your customers need, but what they're willing to pay for. Because
Right.
what I saw happening in my early days at Hewlett Packard, and then when I shifted to some other companies, saw it, and I'm seeing the same thing today at ILC Dover, ironically, is engineers will ask in a customer interaction when they're trying to decide, well, what features do I want to add to a next generation thing, whatever that thing is. They'll ask, well, would you like this? Would you like this? Well, any customer in their right mind is going to say, of course I would like that,
Hmm. Right.
because there's no, well, but are you willing to pay for that, and how much are you willing? They never ask
Yeah.
that secondary question of,
Right.
well, what's the real value of that feature to you? If you're just going to put no value on it, say, well, would you like that? Well, of course I'd
Sure.
like it.
Why not?
Sure, why not? Put it in there. Throw everything but the kitchen sink in there, and then
Yeah.
you end up with a product that's over featured for what the market needs, and needs in this case being defined as what they're willing to pay for.
Yeah. So I'm certain that a lot of our viewers operate not only in the technology space, but in like the B2B, maybe manufacturing space or other business to business industries. And so how you know, if you could share with our listeners sort of how you think or how you have best overcome that. What things have you done to help convince management that marketing has some real value and needs to be pursued?
So I talk in my internal customers' language. So
Okay.
my marketing approach has been, at least from a sort of an internal, okay, I need to sell these ideas so that the organization starts making the right investments in new product development, and also spreading those investments over things other than just new product development,
Sure.
to improve our market position. um, I talk in equation form.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I've built an equation around the four P's of marketing, and I've actually modified the four P's to, so we all know the four P's are product, price, promotion, and placement.
Hmm.
But I've actually modified it to two P's and two A's, and put it in an equation form, which is product times price times awareness times availability.
Okay.
And I say that's at a very high level, that's the way all competitive markets work. And depending on the perception of your target customers around those four P's, like, so in other words, you could build the perfect product and price it just right, but if you don't spend any money on building awareness and nobody knows that you have that product in the marketplace, well, we all know what in an equation form, in a multiplicative equation, what happens if one of those terms is zero? The whole
Yeah.
equation goes to it. Doesn't matter how good the
Right.
product is, how well you've priced it,
Right.
how well you've built out your channels of distribution. If nobody knows that you have it, then you're in trouble.
Right.
So it's that balancing of and looking at the world in which engineers seem to resonate with. They understand equations,
That's you're right.
and
Right.
so I've talked about marketing in terms of equations
Okay.
of like, okay, how do we build an equation that models this market? And then the equations obviously get far more complex when you're really trying to actually model a market
Sure.
um,
Sure.
with
Yeah.
dozens of terms. But at a high level, I've found that's a good approximation for every market I've participated in,
That's
which is this
great.
product times price times awareness times availability. And then you can break each of those terms down into subcomponents. And the key thing that most engineers take a while to wrap their mind around is what you're really measuring is perception. And I
Hmm.
remember way back in my early time at Hewlett Packard, I built one of these equations. Was able to convince my manager to give me a little bit of funding to go do some market research. I built one of these equations, and when I was presenting it to an engineering team, I had an engineer jump up out of his chair and say, "Well, that's crap," and pointing to one of my slides. He said, "I can take you back in the lab and show you that our product is better than the competitor's product." And I said, "Well," I said, "unfortunately, the money's not in your pocket. It's in the customer's pocket
Yeah.
before it's in
Right.
our pocket.
Yeah.
So it
Yeah.
doesn't matter what we think about our products. What matters is what the customer thinks about our products. And
Yeah.
what we're measuring here is the perception of, not the actual measurement. And by the way, that then informs your marketing communications efforts and all of that by saying, okay, you do have a better product, and you can actually measure it, by quantitative measurement in a
Hmm.
laboratory.
Right.
These are for laboratory instruments, but your customers don't believe you do. So
Yeah. Yeah.
now you're not, and in that case, when you combine that with other pieces of the market research, well, the customers all know that you're in the market, but they believe that you don't make a product that suits their needs. So now
Yeah.
you have an informed way of going about your marketing communications as well.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Yeah. Definitely. Definitely challenging. I mean, it's challenging enough to build awareness and to get people to buy products. But certainly when you're, having to convince internal teams of the value, that just adds a different layer of complexity. And it sounds like you've found and have used, techniques to successfully do that, and that's great. Curious, just staying on sort of the marketing topic. Do you currently work with any marketing agencies at all?
So we work with a PR agency currently
Okay,
that is specialized in the space area. So
interesting.
the
Okay,
lady that runs the agent that started the agency, her father was really high placed in NASA back in
okay,
the during the Mercury and Gemini and Apollo eras, and so she grew up in the space industry,
okay, okay.
and she ended up starting a PR firm, a marketing slash PR firm that specializes in, and all their clients um, are space
In the
oriented
same,
in
yeah.
the same
Okay.
thing. And the value to me, and one of the ways I was able to sell that expense of bringing them on board to my management team
Hmm.
is they serve a dual purpose for us. Because for the longest time, I mean, I started this whole discussion by saying we were NASA's best kept secret.
Yeah.
Even within the space industry, if you're not specifically in the space suit piece of it,
Yes.
you probably don't know ILC Dover. So we have a huge
Okay.
awareness problem. One of the beauties of this agency is they've been able to connect me because their customers are Boeing Aerospace, Sierra Space,
Nice.
Lockheed Martin. So their customers are people that we want to do business with.
Potential. Yeah. Right.
Potential. So it's been sort of a not only do they bring a perspective of how do you promote yourself within the aerospace industry, but they bring a Rolodex with them that's been
That's great.
hugely valuable to me.
That's great. So are they getting like thought leadership articles placed or what?
Yes,
Okay, got it. So from a marketing standpoint, they're helping you build awareness by just
right. And they
getting
have
the
great contacts with the press in the
great.
space industry, the technical press.
Okay.
And so we've been able to position our lead spacesuit engineer as I mean, we knew he was the world's leading spacesuit engineer. And
Yeah.
I don't say
Right.
that lightly. He is literally the world's leading spacesuit engineer.
that's
Um,
that's awesome.
and
How cool would it be to be that guy?
Yeah, well, I have to tell you a funny story. Is he did all the work on back years ago when he was a younger engineer on the latest generation of spacesuit gloves,
Okay.
and our gloves are phenomenal. And we had an incident. This was long before I joined the company. I think it goes back about 15 years, where a pair of our gloves disappeared from a trade show,
Mm.
and about 3 years later, the Russian gloves, the gloves on the Orlan suit, started looking
Oh,
a whole lot better.
oh my.
And could be a coincidence. I'm not a big
Yeah.
believer in those kind of coincidences. I believe there was actually some industrial espionage that went on, and
Yeah, I don't
there was
doubt
some
that.
Russian spy that was in the
Wow.
country and somehow figured out a way to sneak a pair of gloves out of the country, and they
Oh,
reverse engineered them, and they're
wow.
so quite an honor to. I mean, it's a sad story in that we
Of
lost some
course. Yeah.
technology to the Russians,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. Yeah.
when you think of it from that engineer's perspective and his own ego,
Yeah.
he's the man.
So you're using him as sort of the thought leader
Yes.
in promoting him. Yeah, that's really cool. So do you have an in-house team or are you pretty much it?
I have a small in-house team. I mostly rely on this agency, and then
Okay.
I mean and I do have a dual role. It's so I have my a small marketing team in-house. So I have a
Okay.
marketing. I have a graphic designer in-house. So some of those things that I have in-house. But I'm also my title is this dual title of
Hmm.
marketing and business development. But
Right.
business development is my joke about business development is it's sales without a quota. So I'm effectively the salesperson
Right.
for the division too. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
go, but there's so few potential customers.
Sure.
Now, granted, it's more than NASA, but actually, as an example, just about 4 months ago, I had a face-to-face, one-on-one meeting with Jeff Bezos, Blue
Hmm.
Origin.
Wow.
Um, so
That's
um,
cool.
so yeah, so by placing some of these thought leader articles, it's been easier for me to takes fewer phone
L-
calls for me to get
leverage that.
into to leverage
Yeah.
that to get into to talk to some key business leaders. And I have to
Right.
say, Elon is still a mystery to me. But but Jeff, I know pretty well now.
That's awesome.
So
Wow.
so I have this weird dual role
Yeah.
of doing part-time sales, part-time marketing.
Yeah. What advantages or disadvantages do you see in going in-house with some of the services versus looking outside?
So for the advantage I see for bringing certain things like graphic design and that sort of stuff in-house
Hmm.
is um, that we have a bunch of infrastructure in the company already. We're pretty well funded already, so it's not like we can't afford. And by the way, that graphic designer is a shared resource between my product area and some other product areas
Okay, got
within.
it.
So we can keep a graphic designer in-house busy full time,
Yeah,
and so you're not paying the overhead of an agency on top of that.
sure, sure.
Now, for some of the things that we were just talking about that the
Right.
agency can bring that would take me years, maybe decades to
To
develop
build up.
relationships, to
Right.
build up, I can get that instantly through an agency. So
Got it.
um,
Yeah, that
time
makes
time
good
value of
sense.
money.
Yep.
Um,
So I've got two last questions for you. I'm curious, any advice you'd give to marketers or, a marketer thinking about bringing a new agency on board?
Um, I believe it's highly situational dependent. So
Sure.
I brought agencies on board in past lives with different product lines, but very different kinds of situations. So it's very situation specific. So to go back to my situation now, I desperately needed, because I'm new to the space industry, and
Mhm.
I'm an anomaly in the space industry from two standpoints. One, I'm a marketing guy.
Right.
It's an industry that's absolutely dominated by engineers, rightly so. And secondly, I am not a lifer in the industry.
Right.
Virtually
Okay.
everybody, like our lead spacesuit engineer, the guy I was telling you about, he spent his entire career at ILC Dover. He got an
Okay.
aerospace engineering degree about 20, 25 years ago
Yeah.
from a respected aerospace engineering university, and he came to work for ILC Dover, and he's been here ever since. And that's
Yeah.
typically the case in the
Got it.
aerospace industry, is people are lifers, and what I call lifers in the industry. So I needed, because of that situation that I find myself in now, I needed an agency that had that deep industry experience,
Yeah. Yeah.
because I couldn't
Got it.
provide that. So it's
Right.
the way I look at that is look at your own weaknesses and be brutally honest with yourself, and then fill in with an agency those areas and do your due diligence and make sure you select an agency that has those strengths, because not everybody does everything well.
Yeah.
But you need to look for strengths in areas where you have weaknesses.
Right. No, that's great advice, definitely. And that, that applies frankly to any industry, not
Yeah.
just aerospace. So that's excellent. Appreciate that. And my last question is, if an agency was trying to knock down your door and attempting to win business from you, what advice would you give that agency?
Um, the biggest advice I would give them is do their due diligence before they pick up the phone or send that first email.
Okay.
I can't tell you how many emails I get from that I consider just spam, where somebody will in the opening line of the email or in the greeting on a voicemail will start out by saying, "Well, I don't know exactly what your company does, but we provide these services."
Oh
And it's like, are
no.
you kidding me? Like,
Oh geez.
if you start with that,
Yeah. Wow. I wonder what sales school they went to.
right, exactly.
So yeah, so do your due diligence, understand kind of what the company does as a
What the
starting
company
point, I would
does, and
imagine.
yeah, and understand something about the markets that they, like for instance, in the spacesuit area, there's only two companies in the world in the past 55 years that have engineered and manufactured spacesuits that have actually been used in space. Two. It's
That's
ILC
crazy.
Dover, and it's a Russian company, former Soviet company called NPP Zavazda.
Okay.
That's it.
Yeah.
Now we're
Yeah.
starting to have more competition now
Sure.
as space is becoming commercial, but looking at a historical perspective, and that's not difficult information to find out.
Sure.
Whereas even people who know that, oh, okay, well, I see you make spacesuits. Well, tell me about your competitors. Okay, well, we don't really have any competitors in the sense that because of these export restrictions, we can't sell to the Russians. So
Hmm. Yep.
now the Russian government doesn't put the same sort of restrictions on NPP Zavazda, so they've sold suits to the Chinese.
Have
So
they?
the
Okay.
Chinese takonauts who have taken, it's been very few, who have taken spacewalks have done them in Russian Orlan suits.
Okay.
So,
Interesting.
but to not know just the basics about an industry
Yeah.
when you make that
Yeah.
first call
Right.
is,
Right.
I find that pretty amazing. I mean, it's
Yeah.
as you said, what sales school did they go to?
Yeah. Right. Right. Exactly.
I mean, before I
Well,
started calling to get to Jeff Bezos at Blue Origin, I did weeks and weeks worth
oh,
of research.
I'm sure. That's fantastic. I love it. Um, well, great. Hey, Dan, this has been fantastic. I just have really enjoyed the conversation, learning about you and your background and ILC Dover and the work that the company does, and just some of the challenges that you faced over the years and how you've overcome them. I think the listeners are going to learn a lot, and I think get some great value from the insights that you've provided. So. Thanks again for the time, and wish you nothing but the best. And I can't wait to see the ILC Dover brand and logo on the next walk of the moon.
Yes, we're
All
looking
right,
forward to that as well.
I'm
Um,
sure. Well, thanks so much. You have a great rest of the day.
okay, thank you, Mark. It's been my
All right,
pleasure to
take
be
care.
on.
Thanks.